Tiger fans, welcome to another episode of the official Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club podcast, bringing you all the latest news, updates, and buzz surrounding your mighty JSU Tigers. I am the Corey C. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified of all future episodes. Apple Podcasts and Spotify video users, rate and review the show. And everyone, go follow Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club on Facebook and Tiger Talk 1400 on Instagram and Twitter. It all helps the cause, which is the I love Jackson State University. And we are headed to Mobile, Alabama for a home game. That's right, a home game in Mobile against the Alabama A&M Bulldogs in the Gulf Coast Challenge. And here to tell us all about those Bulldogs is a familiar voice, a familiar face. He is an award-winning sports journalist, and he's currently the sports director at Fox 54 News in Huntsville, none other than Mo Carter. Welcome back to Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club.
Hey, Corey, good to see you, my friend. Hope all is well in your neck of the woods.
Absolutely. All is good. We're looking forward to this game. Obviously, when we're talking to Alabama A&M, you're synonymous with the squad. You know all about the team, Coach Maynard. So we definitely like to kind of see what we're getting ourselves into. So this team, obviously 3-6, 3-3 in the SWAC. We really want to dive into it. But first, kind of just give us, your Cliff Notes version of how this season has gone so far for the Bulldogs.
I mean, it's literally been up and down, but it really started down before it actually got on up. Obviously, the first 4 games of the season, and, dropping the huge one to UAB, which kind of seemed expected or whatever. But then, they were in the game against Troy. And then all of a sudden things just kind of just went by the wayside. Had a chance against Austin P, and I'll never forget this stat line. They got into Austin P territory 7 times, and I'm talking about like the 35-yard line or closer, and came away with 3 points on 7 possessions. So they just had no way of taking opportunities that were in front of them. And then down there in Florida A&M, came out, did quite well or what in the beginning, but then they could not sustain some late second quarter situations, and eventually that rolled into a loss for them. Then they rolled off 3 victories. They picked up a victory against Bethune-Cookman, picked up an overtime victory against Grambling, and then after what was supposed to be in St. Louis and got moved back to Arkansas, they beat Pine Bluff in a pretty close but competitive game. Then after that, I mean, the reels have kind of fallen off the rail once again. They blew a lead to arch rival Alabama State in the Mad City Classic. Then from there, on a short week, they came over to the state of Mississippi, national television, and, gave Coach Vincent Dancy and the Delta Devils their first win of the season. So as I mentioned, it's literally been a season of downs and ups, and now it looks like they're kind of going back into the downward trajectory as they get ready for the best team in the SWAC and perhaps in all of HBCU football.
Definitely. So a roller coaster of a season. And, let's go back to that Mississippi Valley game, because going into the game, only 2 SWAC losses. So you like to think that you have a chance. Granted, Jackson State's undefeated, expected to run the table, but you never know what can happen. You want to give yourself a puncher's chance if the kind of ball falls in your favor. But how crushing, how disappointing was that loss, especially to a winless team?
Oh, it was absolutely disappointing. I mean, the fact that they actually, when you look at the yardage of what they outgained Mississippi Valley in various stat categories, but at the end of the day, costly turnovers and missed opportunities were the main thing that actually did Alabama A&M in. I mean, Quincy Casey got majority of the snaps, former Jackson State Tiger. At one point in time, he got majority of the snaps. I think he threw for over 300 something yards. Yeah, and he had some touchdowns, but he had 2 costly interceptions that led to Mississippi Valley points. And then I'm not going to go ahead and say you put all the blame on the quarterback or whatever and stuff, because you need the weapons around him to still make plays. And I'll say I counted 7 drops by Alabama A&M receivers. And at least 2 of those drops were in the hands of receivers that were in the end zone. So, you think about, like, what if they had 4 drops? But 2 of those that were in the end zone would have been touchdown. Like, it's a whole team thing that you have to kind of go back and look at. And I'm pretty sure they were shaking their head looking at the game film like, man, we should have won this game or whatever. But Mississippi Valley took advantage of the mistakes that Alabama A&M made. Also, they took advantage of a short week, and they also took advantage of just, being under the bright lights on national television. And it's definitely demoralizing the way Alabama A&M has lost their previous two games in less than 2 weeks.
Hmm. Yeah. Now coming off a 7-3 season, picked to finish third in the East going into this season, but they struggled a bit defensively last season. And they, although they were a juggernaut at times offensively, with of course Mr. Glass running the show, but this year they've fallen on hard times on offense. Currently ranked 10th in the league in points per game at just under 21. So would you say that's the biggest difference between this season and last season?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge difference. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, we knew that as Alabama A&M offense may not have been as explosive as it was
Mhm.
during the Aquil Glass years. But I mean, you see that all the time with various schools, no matter if they're SWAC, if they're PWI, you will have that fall off. I mean, I can go into various examples or whatever, but I don't know if we got that much time. But one
Mhm.
that really like just sticks out to me. Let's go back to the mid 2000s. Remember when Bruce Eugene was lighting up the
Mhm.
scoreboards for Grambling State, and then once he left or whatever, after that it went into the hands of Brandon Landers, and I mean they weren't lighting up the scoreboard, and clearly, I think the year after Bruce's senior year, if I remember correctly, they finished with a losing season. Yeah, they finished with a losing season. And the other thing I remember was that obviously they had to go ahead and actually make changes, and out went Melvin Spears and in came Coach Rod Broadway, as a matter of fact. And eventually that offense still was so, but eventually they got some things going. But clearly, like, imagine Bruce Eugene had more years, they would have continued to be strong on offense.
Mhm.
So
Sure.
sometimes you just gotta have to look at like the transition stuff. And I mean, and I think at the end of the day, you always have to be prepared for that next man up. I just think that the way things kind of played out, it was this is how what I thought. So obviously they had a lot of transfers
Mhm.
from the transfer portal. One of the main transfers was Williams, that was coming from Miami. Former starter, University of Miami,
Mhm.
played
Right.
quite
Mhm.
well during his career or whatever. I think the ball was supposed to be in his court to be the starting quarterback,
Mhm.
and he probably got majority of the reps during the spring, and then all of a sudden he decided to step away from football because they had some mental issues he had to go ahead and
Mhm.
deal with. Eventually he decided to go ahead and just quit football just in general,
Mhm.
and just focus on life or whatever. So I think from there
Mhm.
that became a big blow. And then all of a sudden, sure, you got Xavier Langford and you got Quincy Casey, two guys that have some experience, but now they're thrusted into a quarterback battle with only 3 weeks to go into the season, four
Right.
weeks if you want to give it
Mhm.
tops. So that's a different scenario. And you think about what chemistry was probably like. You think about what the play calling, changes up or whatever in those situations. So I think because of all that, that's why the offense really got off to a slow and sluggish start.
Mhm.
And then during the time where they actually found success, what did they do? They went completely opposite than what we're used to seeing. They started running the ball heavily. Donovan Eagle in the
Mhm.
Michigan
Mhm.
State transfer, he was pounding the rock and toting it or whatever quite well for Alabama A&M while they tried to find an offensive identity. But eventually, defenses will load up in the box, and then you're forcing your quarterbacks to throw once again. And now I kind of feel like you're back to the drawing board trying to figure out what you're going to do in these upcoming weeks. Obviously, if it works, it works. If not, you got to go back and change the game plan. And I'm pretty sure, that's probably something Coach Dancy saw when he was looking at at the film and whatnot. I mean, obviously, I remember playing against Coach Dancy, heck of a
Mm.
defensive player, so
Mhm.
great defensive mind. So I'm pretty sure he and the staff saw some things, and that's how they made some stuff happen. On top of taking advantage of the turnovers and mistakes that Alabama A&M made last week, which resulted in the Delta Devils' first win of the season.
So going back to that quarterback situation, Quincy Casey, he took the bulk of. I think he may have taken all of the snaps last week against Mississippi Valley. Had a big game throwing wise, 366. You talked about the costly interceptions, but has he, being that he's taking the bulk of the snaps now, has he separated himself as the clear starter for now?
Well, when we asked Coach Maynard Coach Maynard kind of nodded to the fact that Quincy Casey appears to be ahead of it, but because of the way the offense has really been inept these past couple of weeks, they're it's almost like who's playing better this week in
Mhm.
practice, and then we will
Gotcha,
make a
gotcha.
decision, based on it. And obviously, you have to kind of take what your defenses give you as well. I mean, granted, I think Quincy Casey probably runs a better spread RPO type style, while Xavier Langford is probably setting more for a pro style. Let's kind of run the rock to set up the play action a little bit or whatever. So I guess it just depends on what their game plan is as they try to go up against this vaunted defense that Jackson State presents on Saturday.
hmm And going back to that running back room, you talked about Eaglin, the transfer from Michigan State, but the preseason All SWAC first team running back Gary Quarles, who led the SWAC in rushing last season, decided to hit the portal. So talk about how much of a blow that loss was, and did they skip a beat with Eaglin stepping in at the running back position?
So obviously it was a blow because Gary Quarles, two-time All SWAC standout if I'm not mistaken, and the thing is he's been injured. He
hmm
has been injured on and off, and it's been real tough to get him back on the field. And obviously, when you got a running back room where it's next man up, he kind of started to fall, between the depth charts. Now, obviously, I've heard people actually say or whatever that he's going to hit the transfer portal or whatever stuff. Never got official word on that. And also with the new transfer portal rules, you can't even enter it until December anyway. So, we'll see
Okay.
what kind of happens or whatever with that. But as far as I know, he's still with the team. I've seen him with the team, but as far as him
Okay.
playing, yeah, it just has not. You just haven't really seen him because you've had guys like Donovan Eaglin and Harold Jemison, step up for more of a ground and pound situation. And obviously, Coach Maynard's going to play the healthiest and guy that gives you the best opportunity to play as well. Because I mean, playing
Mhm.
running back is not an easy job at all. I mean, you can literally ask anybody that's ever
Mhm.
toted the rock, even 5 times of the game, how much that's going to hurt. So, clearly the injury bug has, hit a lot of places on the Alabama A&M
Mhm.
offense, and it's not just him. I mean, here's another thing too. You think about a guy like a dude for Ty Ibrahim.
Mhm.
He's
Yep.
battled a foot injury
He
throughout
has.
the
Mhm.
year. And it's one of those things where it's like one week he's good, the next week that foot injury is kind of like really taking a toll. And obviously, if they're thinking about his future, like, okay, why rush it or whatever in those senses. So that kind of all goes back to the chemistry stuff too, when you think
Mhm.
about it, Corey. So man, yeah, like I said, this offense, they're looking for some sort of identity,
Mhm.
like literally. And yes, I know it's next man up, but at the same time, there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things going
Mhm.
on. I just don't think overall they've been able to really come together and be concise. And because of that, that's why you see the record is standing where it is, which will
Mhm.
eventually result in Coach Maynard's first losing season here in Huntsville.
And you talked about those drop passes, those costly drops by the wide receivers. That's obviously contributed to the inconsistency, and that's a kind of uncharted territory for this team over the past couple of seasons because they could make the argument that they've had the best wide receiver unit in the SWAC the past 2 seasons, but they lost a bunch of those guys due to the transfer portal, graduation. You talked about Ibrahim nursing the injury as well. So has the loss of some of those guys, coupled with the loss of Glass, really impacted the offense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember not Coach Glass, Aquil Glass saying like how he and his guys would work out so many times a week, or they would take a trip and go work out, and you build that chemistry during the off season. When you
Mhm.
don't have a scenario like that, you end up kind of going week to week with it. Now, don't get me wrong, during preseason camp, like Quincy Casey and Xavier Langford, they got their fair share of offensive reps or whatever. Like I would go to
Mhm.
practice on a Monday. Quincy's running with the ones, Xavier's running with the twos, and then and they go through the motions. Then maybe the next day you flip flop it or whatever and stuff. So it was a
Okay.
true competition, but I still do feel that because we didn't really know who was going to be the starter all the way until what 2 days before the UAB game.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that the chemistry wasn't there, but just being a former player, I have a feeling that's really what it really came down to whatever with too. And also remember too, Ibrahim, like his injury happened like third week of preseason camp.
Mhm.
So you're still trying to fit all these other guys in, all these transfers, all these other gentlemen who are still trying to find the reps. Isaiah Cox, Cameron Young, Terrell Gardner, he's a veteran. He's been on the team. Brian Jenkins Jr., another guy who's been
Yep.
nursing
Mhm.
injuries throughout the entire year. I mean, you know, I'm gonna look at it like this. as far as a starting four wide receiver core, I'm not sure how many games the true starting four has actually played together
Okay.
this year
Got
because of how things have gone, quite frankly.
Yeah. Wow. Tough season for the Bulldogs, definitely. Especially on offense, but which they've hung their hat on. But defensively, which was kind of a liability at times last season, there has been some improvements since last season, but not enough to put them amongst the elites of the conference. The defense is giving up about 34 points a game. That ranks 10th in the conference. I know Coach Maynard has really focused on the transfer portal to overhaul that unit, and he's really made no bones about it. So talk about that side of the ball.
So obviously they had to make changes on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, hands down. Granted, they don't have a guy named Aquill Glass on the other side of the
Mhm.
ball. They probably lose a whole lot of games because of the defense. So yeah, he made some changes, and because he made those changes or whatever, he hit the transfer portal, and they kind of reconstructed their defense. Under what you see right now going with it. He brought in his former defensive coordinator from Winston Salem State, in which back in those times, that's when Winston-Salem State was going to the Division II championship, and they ended up what they ended up losing at the D2 championship. I think the Valdosta State, but Kindness Bolware was the guy that was the architect of that defense and actually took over Coach Maynard after Coach Maynard left to go to Hampton before he came over to Alabama A&M. And I mean, yes, you've seen improvements on defense. Guys like Dre Terry and Zarian Hayes and Avion Rice have been making plays for that defense. I think another thing too that's kind of like a hidden gem or whatever is that because of the inept of the offense, the defense has been put in more bend but break situations than they probably should be allowed, quite frankly. And I'll use that Austin
Mhm.
P
Mhm.
game for example. I mean, you get to the Austin P 40 and 35-yard line 7 times and you only get 3 points. That is demoralizing for the defense, knowing that, man, we got y'all the ball
Mhm.
back and y'all still can't
That
do
is.
anything or whatever. And I mean, and I'm speaking not
Mhm.
only from what I saw, but also being a former collegiate defensive back as well. That is definitely
Mhm.
demoralizing in
Mhm.
that scenario. So that A&M defense is actually, while the numbers may not show it, they're much improved. It's just at the end of the day, defense, offense, and special teams, they all worked hand in hand. And because you haven't seen much offensive success this year, it's why some of these defensive numbers don't look as great as they could or they should be. But I will say
Mhm.
this. They've gotten off the field a lot more times this year on third down than what they've done, God, in the last 2 3 years, to be honest with you or whatever. But unfortunately, because they get to the point where eventually it just breaks down, and that's where a lot of games kind of get away from them. I mean, the Florida A&M game was a true example. The Troy game was a true
Mhm.
example. Like, things were going well, and then the wheels fall off because of just certain things happening on both sides, and it kind of just becomes the cause and effect in that scenario. I mean, and granted, I mean, what they're about to face on Saturday, shoo, it's going to be literally a test of might and will. I mean, I wish them the best in
Mhm.
that situation, but I mean, Shadur Sanders has been putting up some very good numbers. I mean, behind the quarterback from Fordham and also Lindsey
Yep.
Scott Jr.
On you.
I'm pretty sure he's like right there as far as like top offensive production from the FCS level on the quarterback standpoint. And with that being said, all of a sudden, that's what Alabama A&M's defense is tasked to try to
Mhm.
stop this upcoming weekend. And quite frankly, can they do it? Probably not,
Yeah.
but who knows? What's going to happen. Football's a weird game.
Yeah. It's a strange game. It's a strange game, and you talked about the defensive end Hayes, were one of their top guys. He's been really wreaking havoc in the trenches as far as his numbers: 14 tackles for losses, 46 total tackles, and 2.5 sacks. But if I'm not mistaken, he'll have to sit out the first half against Jackson State due to a targeting call. So they'll be even, definitely not at full strength. Already a defense that's already kind of struggling will be even less than full strength. So that's something to look out for as well. And of course, the game will be in Mobile. This is a Jackson State home game, but I will be again in Mobile in the Gulf Coast Challenge. So, give me your thoughts on that, the atmosphere that we can expect.
So Alabama A&M has been playing in the Gulf Coast Challenge, a number of years. I remember the first year they played Southern, and you had like about 25, 26,000 down there. They played Central State not too long ago, and then they played Tuskegee. And I mean, you've had good numbers, but the way Jackson State has been traveling, I'm pretty sure if this game isn't sold out, it will be sold out by the time kickoff like really rolls down. Um, Tim Hale and oh god, the guy's name escapes me right now, but the other gentleman that's really in charge of it, two HBCU grads, one guy graduated from Southern University. Another guy graduated from Alabama A&M. They've been doing a really, really good job when it comes to fundraising for this game to make solid payments to the teams. And also, there are a lot of activities that kind of surround this game as well, whether it's comedy shows or concerts or, battle of the bands type things, along with I know there's a parade as well. So there's a lot of things, a lot of good things that kind of surround the game before the actual game, goes on. So, and also, I'm quite familiar with the fact that Alabama A&M has a pretty large alumni base down in the Mobile area, but I think Jackson State actually has a
Mhm.
pretty good alumni base along the Gulf
Definitely,
Coast as well.
definitely,
Yeah, so when you
absolutely.
kind of bring both of those or whatever together, I'm pretty sure that the atmosphere is going to be solid or whatever and whatnot. At first, I admit I thought it would probably been more of a pro A&M crowd, but winning cures all things when it comes to things of
Mhm.
that nature. So with that being said, I mean it's probably going to be a little bit more even, maybe a few more Jackson fans. It kind of will depend. Obviously, there's a lot going on riding with this game too.
Mhm.
Jackson State for sure needs one game, one
For sure.
victory to clinch the Eastern Division and represent the SWAC East in the SWAC championship game once again. While for Alabama A&M, you try to just finish out your season on a good note. And yes, you just lost to the team that had the worst record in the SWAC. Now you're going to face the team with the best record in the SWAC.
That's
Like
right.
we said, football is a weird game or whatever, but for Coach Maynard and company, if they could find a way to pull off the ultimate upset on Saturday, that will definitely be a savior to the season for sure. Obviously, they'll still have a
Mhm.
losing season records wise, but they could at least be like, hey, we were actually able to dig deep and pull a huge
Mhm.
upset from that. And obviously, we also know the history for what happened with Coach Maynard and Coach Sanders and the scooter and all that.
Mhm.
Nothing was said of that nature or
I,
whatever.
yeah, I was waiting on something. I
Yeah,
wanted some
nothing.
some pregame theatrics.
Yeah, I think Coach Maynard, kind of learned his lesson, whatever, with
Mhm.
that last year. But also, too, I think it really kind of just boils down to what's really, really going down on the field. And also, Coach Maynard could be like, hey, look, I ain't got to go ahead and do the pregame theatrics, the postgame theatrics, because my friend down in Montgomery took care of that.
Yeah,
In
we
Eddie
did. We
Robinson.
did. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
with the whole I
that
am
was fun.
swag stuff, and
Yeah,
I don't even
definitely.
want to even go into go into that and whatnot. But as
Yeah.
far as the atmosphere, I think the atmosphere will be very, very good. City Mobile has been waiting on this game for a long time, and they're going to see this matchup this year, and they're going to see this matchup also in the year
Awesome.
2024. Yeah, 2023. I don't exactly know what the game is set. I heard rumor that A&M may be playing Tuskegee down there, but I don't have true confirmation on that. That's kind of like hearsay from the street committee or whatever. Sometimes street committee could be cool, but I,
Mhm. Yeah,
I, I
yeah,
like to see
yeah.
things in words first, before
Mhm.
I truly, truly go off the street committee stuff. If you know what I mean.
Right, right. Yeah, no doubt. So, yeah, we expect a great atmosphere. You talked about Jackson State having a fan base there. Definitely a huge alumni base. Of course, one of our greats, Robert Brazile, Dr. Doom, the Pro Football Hall of Famer. He's from there, and we've always recruited well in that area. So we're looking forward to it. And if I'm not mistaken, from a traveling from a distance standpoint, the distance to Jackson from Huntsville and Mobile is roughly the same, maybe a few minutes difference, or that didn't really
Yeah,
change, right?
yeah. It's So obviously, with me having Louisiana ties, I've had to go both
Yeah,
routes.
you made that trip.
Yeah,
Mhm.
make that trip. So no, it literally is about the same going both ways. I mean, if you drive the speed limit from Huntsville to Mobile, you'll
Mhm.
get there i- in and around about 5 hours, 5 hours and some change, and you can get from Huntsville to Jackson just about 5 hours as well. So yeah, it's about one what
That's
give or
right.
take. And the best thing about it too is that it's all interstate.
Mhm.
for A&M fans that are traveling from this way. No matter if you're going to Jackson or if you're going to Mobile, like they're doing this weekend, all you got to
Mhm.
do is go roll out the I-65, go down 65
Mhm.
through Birmingham, through Montgomery, through Atmore, and eventually you make your way down to the Gulf
Mhm.
Coast where Mobile is located.
Definitely. Last thing, man, watching those Louisiana ties, you always let it be known that you are a proud Southern Jaguar. You're gonna make sure you get that out. So I have to ask you, man, this Wild Wild West. It seems like every year we're in this situation. So your thoughts, man? How's this thing gonna go? Like, how crazy is that West?
Yeah, and the West is real, real crazy. And when I mean crazy, we're talking about the fact that myself I had to put myself in a fan mode last Friday or whatever,
Mhm.
like, and I actually had the roof for all Corn State. That don't happen too
Mm,
often or whatever.
mm,
But they did what they needed to do in upsetting Prairie View in overtime, which basically for one day put Southern back in the driver's seat for to win the West and control their own destiny. But then they go to Florida A&M, go to brag, and unfortunately lay an egg down there. So all of a sudden, Southern doesn't control their own destiny once again, and literally becomes a wild, wild west where anyone from 1 to 4 teams could literally like win that
right.
theoretically. Now, realistically, I think it's still down to both Prairie View and Southern. I give the nod to Prairie View just because they do have what seems to be the easier schedule. I mean, they have Mississippi Valley and they have Pine Bluff in their final remaining in their final games, while Southern's got Valley and Grambling, coming up. So with that being said, obviously they have the easier stretch of games if you're Prairie View. But stranger things have happened when it comes to these late season games. And I mean, for Southern, I mean, it's not an easy situation for them. I mean, obviously they're going to face a charged up Valley team on Saturday who just got their first win or whatever, and they're not going to hang their hat off of that first win. They're going to try to, win out if they can, and then you get the bye week, and then you get the Grambling game down in the Bayou Classic down in New Orleans, and shoot, you just throw the records out with that game, when it balls down to it, and I mean. Obviously, usually that game has some kind of implication on the SWAC championship game, so it would be cool
Mhm.
if it goes down to that. But once again, if you're Southern, you're going to need Prairie View to drop one of their final 2 games, whether it's Arkansas Pine Bluff or Mississippi Valley, next week. It's simple for Prairie View. Prairie View just has to win out. That's all they have to do. They win out, then
Take care of
they're going to
business.
represent. Exactly. They're going to represent the West once again in the SWAC championship game, and basically get that rematch against potentially Jackson State. I don't want to just say Jackson State just right now or whatever and stuff, but
You can say
but right now
you
they
can
are
say
the
it.
front runner. They are the front runner or whatever from that. But
Right.
if JSU handles business on Saturday, then we can be like, yeah, Prairie View, Jackson State, more than
Right.
likely a SWAC championship rematch from that situation. So yeah, the West is really, really wild. But I also will say this: I actually do like it because that means that every single game is still meaningful all the way down to the end
Absolutely.
of the
Mhm.
season. So with that being said, it's really, really good to see that, and it's really, really good to know that lots of good football do have to be played. And then on top of that, I mean, for the SWAC, we know obviously the eyeballs are on the SWAC as far as what's going on with everybody, every school,
Mhm.
every coach, plus Florida A&M, they're trying to get into the FCS playoffs like they did last
Mhm.
year as well. And for them, they all they have to do is really just handle business coming up. I really think, though, in my opinion, I think they have to have some impressive victories down the stretch to impress the committee. Um, in these last couple of weeks that they've got. They've got Alabama State on Saturday. Actually, go to Montgomery, so that's going to be a very interesting game. A matchup of former SIAC rivals from way, way back in the gap, and then they have the Florida Classic, the following week, and who knows
Mhm.
what Bethune Cookman is going to bring to the
You
table
never know
with
with that.
that.
Mhm.
Exactly. I mean, Bethune Cookman had won what 9 in a row or something before last year.
In a row.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
I
Crazy.
think so. Yeah, it was something crazy. And majority of those years they weren't even the better team on the field, but they just
One
had that
even better team.
advantage.
Mhm.
Yep, they
Mhm.
had the advantage over Jackson State or whatever with that. So there's still a lot of good football left to be played in the SWAC, no matter if you're at the top of the standings or if you're at the bottom of the standings, because Strange things could happen for one, and everybody's trying to finish out on a good note, man. So it'll
Mhm.
be. But going back to your original question, yeah, I don't know who the heck's coming out the West. To be honest with you,
It'll
that's
be
why we gotta
interesting.
watch. Yeah, we'll have to watch the football games and see what goes on with it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We expect to clinch this weekend, and we expect to host the SWAC championship game. We hosted Prairie View last season, and hey, just from a SWAC standpoint, Jackson State versus Southern in the event for the championship, we can't beat it, especially with the first game being affected by the rain. Granted, it didn't rain, really rain until the second half, but a lot of people stayed home because it to rain. So I can just imagine that game in Jackson all the marbles. So we'll see what happens, but we'll take it week by week. Obviously, upcoming for Jackson State, Alabama, A&M should be a fun one in Mobile. Mo Carter, we appreciate you.
Hey, it's no problem, man. Thanks for always having me on, and appreciate what you guys are doing with Tiger Talk and
Yeah,
1400 Club and whatnot. Keep up the good work, and if you're heading down to Mobile, safe travels this upcoming weekend, and hopefully, we'll definitely cross paths real soon once again.
no doubt. All right, take care.
You too.
And that'll do it for this episode of Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. Thank you to all of our listeners. And again, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Apple Podcast and Spotify video users, rate and review the show. And everyone, go follow Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club on Facebook and Tiger Talk 1400 on Instagram and Twitter. We're looking to do some big things with this platform to aid the athletics department. And it all starts with you downloading, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. And tell every Tiger that you know. We're on all podcast outlets, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify Video, YouTube, and so on. And we'll be posting each episode on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. As always, thanks for your support. Go Tigers. Hashtag I believe. Hashtag the I love.